So let's talk about how we got started. I think
Yeah,
that's a
I
good
love that
topic.
idea.
Um, I'm going to let you go first. I want to hear your story because
You want me to go first?
I tell my story all the time, and I like hearing other people's stories. So that's what I'm going to do. I want to hear your story.
So my mom and my dad met. I'm just kidding. So for us, I mean, we started our business in, let's see, it's been 13 years. So what year is it now? 2023. So 2010 ish is when we started the business. My wife and I met in the Navy. So we were both in the Navy. We met on the same ship. Shout out to USS Ronald Reagan, which is currently in Japan right now, but we met in San Diego. Um, and uh, Everywhere we went, because we were kind of dating on the ship while we were kind of traveling the world and everything. And everywhere we went, every country we went to, I was always taking pictures. I was taking pictures of where we went. I was taking pictures of her. Um, and then I got out of the Navy, and um, it was time for me to like figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I went back to college and was trying to get a computer science degree because I was doing IT work in the Navy. And I got out and got an IT job. And I started going back to school, and I was like, I hate every second of this. I already know this stuff. I hate that I'm going to class learning all this. Like, we're learning about stuff in books that I was doing while I was getting shot at, you know? So I'm like, this is ridiculous. And Brandy was like, well, why don't you go back to school for something that you want to do? Like, it's, you know, you already have an IT job. So just get a degree in whatever you want to get it in. And I was like what? She was like, what about photography? Um, so I was like, oh, I never thought about that. Let me see if they have a photography program. And they did. And I went back to school and got my photography degree. And then, you know, we got married, and my one job, I was like, you pick everything, whatever you want. The sky's the limit. I want to pick the photographer. And she was like, cool, that's great. So I did all the research and spent as much money as I could possibly, you know, budget spending. And I met the guy, and he was great, and all the photos looked good. Well, then I found out it was a guy who owned a studio that had like 15 photographers working for him. So then I just got one of his random photographers. I could not to this day tell you what her name was. She showed up, took pictures, and like when it was time to like do portraits, she she was like, so what do you guys want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I paid you for this. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I'm like, well, there's a cool spot over there. And she's like, cool, let's go over there. And she like took some pictures. And I was like, what if we do this is more natural? And she's like, oh yeah, that looks great. And like took pictures. And it was just, you know, we ended up directing like all of our photos, and they were good. I still hang them in the house, but they weren't anything to like write home about. But like the level of service of everything. And like she sent us like, we had like a print credit of like stuff that we already purchased beforehand. So we ordered the print credit, and then she just sent us like, you know, a DVD, because that's how old that was.
Yeah.
Like on a CD, we got all of our images, and she's never said a word to us ever again after that. And I was like, man, this like, that's not what I thought that was going to be like. Um, so Brandy was like, well, let's do that. Let's do what we want to do. Like, do what you wanted to do for us, what you wanted her to do for us. Let's do that for other people. So we immediately jumped into doing wedding photography out in DC, where we were living at the time. Because after we got out of the Navy in San Diego, I got out, and then she got orders to DC. So we moved across the country to Washington, DC, where she was stationed, and started the business. And that went on for, you know, 7 years. We were out there and just struggling because it's so expensive to live out there. Um, and I didn't know enough about the business side of being a photographer. My photos were good. They're way better now,
I was going
obviously.
to say, in retrospect, you look
In
back and you're like,
retrospect,
man.
so it's funny. Someone like, it was like World Photography Day recently, and someone posted a thing of like, hey, if I ever took your photo, post a picture in the comments. And I was like, that's a great idea. So I did that. And like literally on our Facebook page, people that we photographed 10, 11, 8 years ago were posting their wedding photos. And I'm like, I would never shoot like that now.
Stop posting
Like it's
these
still
photos.
like, it's not the worst photo that could have, like, I've seen way worse photos today, but even now I'm looking back like, ooh, I wish I could reshoot your wedding again now, knowing what I know now, going back then. But then after she got out of the Navy, we'd been in the business 7 years, really just struggling. We were doing it out of our house. We were meeting clients in Starbucks, to do consults. And then just kind of doing the gallery thing. We're like, here, go to the gallery and order what you want to order. And no one ever ordered anything because that's how galleries work. Not doing IPS at all. And then we started doing some education stuff and trying to learn the business. Got suckered into some really bad education, workbooks and, e-learning stuff.
Right.
We even got
cluster videos that make like you don't even need them, or like most of the stuff you watch and you're like, I kind of already knew that. Like
or it's just people talking about themselves, and I'm like, okay, but how did you get started? Like, I know what you're doing now, but how do I get to where you are?
Yeah.
And just bad education stuff, and then finally found Sal Sankata on Creative Live and his wedding boot camp, and it was the first educator that really broke down like by recipe, like, these are the things you need to do. Here's all of my packages and why and what I charge and why I charge that and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I've been doing this wrong for 6 years.
Yeah.
And then after Brandy got out of the Navy, we were both government contractors out there, both working full time, trying to do the business at night, essentially, and super expensive to live. And she was like, why are we still living here? Like, there's no reason for us to still live here. So I'm originally from Indiana. So we decided to move back. So she's from San Diego, has lived there most of her life. We moved to DC. It's super expensive to live out there too. We came here to Indiana for like my dad's 60th birthday. And she saw a billboard that was like brand new houses, mid 180s. And she was like, what? For a whole house? Like, I'm like, yeah, man, it's the Midwest. Like, you're not spending $750,000 for a 2-bedroom house in the Midwest.
Right.
She's like, why don't we move there? So we ended up moving here, and kind of completely restarted our business over again, 4 or 5 years ago. And, we started over, but like still had like 8 years of knowledge now behind it.
Yeah.
So using that experience, we've been able to springboard in the last 5 years way more than we ever, were doing in the 7 years that we were in DC. But also when we moved here, in Washington, DC, everyone's between the ages of like 25 to 35, and they're all like hot young singles, like fresh out of college, like looking to make their way in the business world and, trying to work in the Pentagon and all this stuff. And, they're all political science majors and this, that, and the other. And there's Georgetown University and stuff. And then we moved here to Indiana where people own yards, and there's high schools all over the place that all have graduating classes in the 500 to 700s. And we could not really make it. We couldn't get our weddings really off the ground to begin with. And we're like, what's happening? But people started coming to us saying, hey, do you do high school seniors? Do you high school seniors? And we did a little bit of that in DC, but not, we're like, okay, let's just change gears and just put all our eggs in this basket for high school seniors and see where it goes. And that just skyrocketed. So now if you were to ask someone local in Indiana, like, hey, what does Grande Photography do? They're like, oh, that's the senior guy who does all the cool high fashion seniors.
That's awesome. And don't go too far into the transfer from state to state, because that's an episode that I want to do all on its own, because you've done it. I'm in the process of relocating the business. So I think that's
because you're moving to Orlando.
Right. And that's a really important video, or that's a really important podcast, I should say, that we can get into in a later episode, the transition and how to do it. So I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
And I'll tell a little bit about
cut me off at any time. I will ramble for an hour.
I'm the same way. So mine, as far as getting into wedding photography, I have a very similar outlook as far as you did, as far as the photographer. And that's kind of the reason I got into wedding photography, but that's not the reason that I got into photography in general. When I was in my early 20s, I actually was a hip hop artist, touring musician, signed to a record label in Atlanta, Georgia, an independent label, still living in Green Bay, in the Green Bay area. But the thing is when you sign to an independent record label, what they don't tell you is you don't get paid until your album sales come, and anything that needs to be done for promotion or marketing, you have to do yourself. So if you need a music video, you have to find someone to shoot it yourself. If you need an album cover, you have to find a photographer. If you need merch designed, you have to find a screen printer. You have to do everything yourself. The label still takes a cut off of anything you make, and then you don't technically get paid until your album sales come out. Well, at 22 years old, 23 years old, I was dirt poor. So it was a place where I was like, I can't afford any of this stuff, but I want to be successful. I'm signed to this label in Atlanta. Like, I want to be successful. So I was like, well, I'm going to just teach myself. I'm going to teach myself photography. This was around 2007, 2008 is when I first picked up a camera and started trying to learn it. Actually 2006, because my first music video was 2006, and it is terrible. I look back at it. One, my wardrobe choice was just ridiculous. I had some of those, like, what I call shants. They're jeans, but they're not quite shorts. They're not quite full length. I got like spiky blonde hair in it. I am wearing this.
Frosted tips? Did you have frosted tips?
No, it was all bleached. So, either that or I had black hair at that time. I don't remember which one it was in the video. But I was wearing like a way oversized, like, Rockaware polo shirt. So yeah, just the wardrobe choices were bad. The song was good. Like, people still actually like the song, but the video was just terrible. My first photos were terrible. I just did a conference last week and I shared my first selfie, I guess you would call them. It wasn't even a selfie at that time. In 2009, it was in my keynote, and like the entire room just busted out laughing that was my first photo compared to where I am now. Yeah. But that's how I got into it. Was I was needing somebody to shoot my own marketing, my own social media, and I was like, I'm just going to learn it myself. So that's how I got into a school of YouTube, a school of, I think at the time there was like photoshoptutorials.com or something like that, where you could like teach yourself Photoshop. Website's not even there anymore. I looked for it not too long ago, just to see if they had updated, because it was like teaching you like how to make bubble text and like how to put bling in your text and like just stuff like that. And that's how it kind of progressed. And it went from me doing terrible photos and videos of myself to people seeing it, and they're like, hey, we want you to do terrible photos and videos of us too. So, and it kind of grew that way, and it just kind of kept progressing and progressing from there. And I started getting better, started learning more, started shooting like product photos, and basically at that time taking any project that I can, which will be another episode we could talk about too, is why you shouldn't just take every project that you can, and you should actually niche down. But we'll talk about that in another episode. But for the most part, it was like, take anything you can, shoot anything you can, get the knowledge, make $100 a session, and do what you could. From there, I actually got a job. So in 2013 or 14, I wrote a song, a hip hop song, for a company that sold like lifted truck tires and wheels and light bars and all of this stuff. So I wrote a song for them. I became friends with the owner from that song, and that song now has 3 million plays on Spotify, just shy of 3 million. But from that, he was just starting to launch this company. I mean, it was just in its infancy of a company, and there was 4 people that worked with him. I was the 5th that came in. And I was their photographer, YouTube like director, I guess you would call, and just kind of the overall website or graphic designer and all of that. So as I was broadening my career as a musician, I was also broadening my career as a photographer. And it came to a point where their business was getting super successful. I'm talking like multiple millions of dollars coming from this business. And my music career was doing pretty well, equal as my photography was getting very popular, because I was working with this company and my name was getting out there, as well as music and as a photographer. So I had my 1-year review with the company, and the owner, he's like, well, we're getting pretty popular. So if you want to continue, I can give you a lot of money. And I'm not going to say the amount, but it was more money than my broke self ever would have imagined I would make. And he's like, but I need you available pretty much 24/7. Like, if we need to shoot a YouTube video at any point, I'm going to call you and I need you there. And I'm like, well, my music career is going okay. And my photography, like, I already have like 10 weddings booked, and I can't just not show up to those if you need me. I'm like, I can't believe that I'm going to do this, but I think that I need to not work here anymore. And he's like, first he was like kind of stunned that I like had the balls to say that. And then he goes, you know, I kind of wanted you to say that. He's like, I'd rather just help you start your own business. He's like, I'd
Yeah,
rather
and then he
give
can
you.
hire you as a. Did he hire you as like a contractor? Like,
No, shortly after that, he had like 26 people on his media department. So,
oh, nice.
because they became just a full blown YouTube like channel, and like hundreds of thousands of subscribers and millions of views, and their company just went crazy big, and it became like a major corporation. But when I started there was 5. The year that I left, there was like 13 people in the company altogether. That following year, they went up to like 300 employees or something like that, and there was like 25 people just creating YouTube videos for them. But from that, I mean, I'm still friends with the owner. I talk to him quite often. He now retired and has a house in the Bahamas that he built.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, that's how good the business
So
went.
he's doing all right for himself.
He's doing okay. Built a church on this island for like the locals to go to, and all this amazing stuff that he did. But from that, he's like, I'm not going to give you financial advice. I'm not going to like show you how to do any of this. He's like, you're going to learn it all on your own. But at any time you have a question, come to me and I'll help you figure it out. So that's kind of how the beginning started. Like, I mean, and I only asked for his help a couple times because at that point I was already learning basics of the business side of things. Even now that I've been doing it for, I guess technically you'd say like 15 years, I still don't know a lot about business. I outsource a lot of that stuff, but that's how I got into it. And from that, that's trying to learn as much knowledge as I could. I've always been that person, whether it was with music or with when I was a teenager and I was skateboarding, pretty much anything that I wanted to learn, I wanted to learn like everything about it. I wanted to learn the scientifics behind something and the reasoning, not just why you do something, but why it affects a person's brain and like how it acts and how it counter reacts and all of this. Anything that I put my mind to, I want to know like everything about it. And from that, I realized that I had some information that I could share with others. And that's how I got into teaching at workshops, conferences, doing all this stuff. And that was, learning and then giving that information, because I tell people all the time, and I think I had briefly mentioned it to you, and I've talked to other photographers that were part of our creator series and stuff. And I'm like, no matter how much you think you don't know, there's always something that somebody knows less about that wants to learn. So like, and I say that a lot, and I say it in pretty much all of my workshops and conferences and stuff like that. Even if it's not going full-fledged, like teaching at conferences and doing workshops and stuff, but networking and talking to other photographers, you're always learning and you're always giving knowledge that people probably sometimes are afraid to ask.
Yeah.
So that's where I went with my career now. Is I've slowed way down on weddings. I went from like doing 40 a year to 10. Next year it's actually going to be less than that. I've went from doing like 1 to 2 workshops a year and maybe 1 conference to like trying to get involved in as many as I can, doing as many workshops as I can, teaching my online academy that I have, my online photography academy, and just doing that. And it's turned into, over the years, me being basically a serial entrepreneur is what somebody just called me. And I now have a small clothing line. I have this amazing podcast that we're working on. The clothing line is called Motivated by Doubt. I wanted to keep it like everything like motivating and like just people hating on me and stuff like that. It was something that I started creating even when I was doing music, and then it kind of just rolled out. Most of the time it's just stuff for myself, and like a few people know about it. I don't actively advertise and Motivated by Doubt much anymore. It's something that I'll pick back up. Just the workshops and the teaching took forever to learn and grow. And so now I'm doing the workshops, I'm doing the podcast. I do motivational speaking at high schools about my teenage life story, which I'll get into in another podcast because that's something else. And then, the teaching and the workshops. So from that, this year, I actually got Entrepreneur of the Year award from the Heart of the Valley Chamber of Commerce, which is the Chamber of Commerce in this area. And that's kind of where my life is up to this point, and YouTube and all of that. So
yeah, all that stuff. So while I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about like, the humble beginnings of stuff. Let me ask you, what was the point where like you get started, you're doing this. what was the point, or was there a point where you were like, this is it, this is what I want to do, you know, regardless of
Um,
what happens, I want to keep doing this forever?
I absolutely hate having a boss. And even though my boss at that company was incredible, it was like having a friend with me. You know what I mean? He never at one point made you feel like he was a boss. But I don't ever want to answer to anybody. Like when it
Mm.
comes to what time I get up, what time I go to sleep, where I need to be. Like I've always wanted to be able to travel as much as I can because, like I said, when I was a teen or and stuff, I had a pretty rough time, and I never got to travel. I never got to experience a lot of stuff. So now that I'm in my 40s, or I should say just 40, so let's not go too deep into that. Now that I'm in my 40s, I want to experience as much as I can, not only for myself, but for my family. And basically, when I quit at that company, my wife supported me fully. And I mean, financially, mentally, everything in between. And so as I was growing and building, it was like one of those things where one, I don't ever want to have a boss again. I never in my life do I want to have somebody that I have to answer for, that I have to request off, any of this stupid stuff. And the other thing is, I never want to be poor again. I never
Mm.
want to be. I mean, even through the beginning phases of my music career, I was poor, and my wife and she supported us. We were dating at the time, and like she paid rent, and she just let me do what I need to do to eventually become successful. And it's still even this to this day, like, you know, as a photographer, we have low points in the bookings and in the income coming in. So at any point, like if I needed, I could be like, hey, I'm struggling, can you help me? And she would. Like, so it's really nice to have that. And that was kind of one of the motivating factors as well, like that when I was like, I love what I'm doing, it's so much fun, but I want to make sure that I never have to give it up. And that's kind of how it was.
So for you, was it more like you just wanted to be an entrepreneur and that sort of manifested in photography?
I've always been a hustler my entire life. I've always tried to make money however I could. And the and I've always also been art related, like everything with music. With my teen years, I was into graffiti and I was into skateboarding and all of this. And like that's, I mean, it's just I've always just been art related. And what happened?
You're just a creator.
We're right, yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm a creative hustler because I'm always about like how can I take what I love to do and make money from it. And that was like, okay, I'm at the time I was bad, but I thought I was good at rapping, so I was like, I'm not just gonna rap, I'm gonna do shows. And then when I do shows, I'd get paid $50 a show. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm getting paid $50 a show, what if I start making my own t-shirts? Then I can sell these t-shirts for $25 a piece and I can make money. And that's like I always like think about like, okay, how can I make more money with what I love doing? And at that time, I bought my own screen printing press. I bought my own embroidery machine. I was doing literally everything out of my basement. I have pictures of like ink and paint literally everywhere in a basement of a duplex that I rented because I was making my own screen printed shirts and stuff like that. But then I got into photography, and it was like one of those things where I wanted to learn it. And I had a good friend of mine, his name's Sean, and he was into it, and he was like taking these photos, and it was like grungy and like dirty, but it was like beautiful at the same time. And I was like, this is so cool, like teach me how you're doing this. And like we would just go out and we'd shoot together, and like just shoot random stuff like fire hydrants and mailboxes and just like this ridiculous stuff that like you look back on it now and you're like, there's no reason for that in the composition to ever need to photograph a mailbox. But like that's what we were doing. And but we were like downtown Chicago shooting like mailboxes that were covered in graffiti, and we were like shooting like statues that were just dirty and covered in bird poop and all this stuff. And like we were just shooting whatever we could that was like grungy but trying to make it beautiful. And
Yeah.
that's it. Just started slowly moving over into the hip hop thing. It was like when I was taking photographs of other rappers and other musicians, they were like real grungy and like just deep colors and contrasty, and but yet still professional and beautiful. And it was just what really attracted me to it. And it just kept building and growing and growing and growing. And I shot more music videos and bigger music videos and bigger projects. And then it just kind of rolled that way. And somewhere in there, I mixed in weddings too. So it went from, um, grungy hip hop artist in a back alley of Chicago to, the most beautiful wedding settings you could ever imagine, shooting just gorgeous brides and grooms and beautiful flowers and making those not look grungy, but using that style and kind of mixing it in.
Yeah. So for me, it was the first wedding we ever photographed, and it's the only wedding I ever photographed by myself. From the first wedding, I was like, Brandy, you have to grab a camera and shoot with me. I can't do this by myself. So we photographed every wedding from our second wedding to today. We photographed everything together. But it was that first wedding they were big baseball fans, and they got married in a baseball park. And then like the reception was like a private room, but like during the game. So they had like stands, or they had like private seats that they go out and watch the game or hang out and dance and do all the stuff. And after the game, there was fireworks. And I set up my camera on a tripod because I knew fireworks was coming. I had it all set up. I was like, I want you guys here, looking at each other, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, okay, cool. Lit it up real nice. And then had the fireworks in the background, and took the picture and like showed her the back of the camera. And she's like crying, at the photo. And I was like, I want to chase this feeling of like someone looking at my photo and like having that emotion. So that was huge. And then after everything, after trying to do it for 6 years, when I found, Sal Sincat on Creative Live, at the end, he was talking about his conference that he was starting called Shutterfest, which is in St. Louis. And I was like, I want to go to this, and went online, found it. Tickets were already sold out. So I had to wait till the next year, and finally went. And at that point, I was like ready to shut our doors. Like I didn't think we were going to make any money at this. We were going into debt, just trying to pay for things, buying gear and all this other stuff, and just not making money at it. And then at Shutterfest, found a model. I went by myself. Brandy didn't go with me that time. She's like, you go, like, do some soul searching, take some classes, see if you can figure out how we're going to save this. And then at that, during one after hours, found a model. I was like, hey, I have this concept in my head that I want to do. And bought some new lights and stuff at the trade show and set it up, and got back to my room and edited the photo. I wanted a ballet dancer, but I wanted to shoot a ballet dancer like a boxer. So it was like in the street, in the alley. She had like boxer shorts on and a hoodie with it up with like ear pods in. And I really wanted to show like this like hardcore training side of being a dancer. Mm-hmm. And I was super proud of the images. And it was really the first, like, more than thinking of like, hey, I'm taking photos to sell photos, to like thinking like an artist and being like, oh no, I really want to tell a story and like be the creator that you wanted to be. So that was a moment where I decided like, no, this is like, I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to figure this out. So I know there's probably someone at home, listening, who's been in that spot before where you're like, I don't know if this is going to make it.
I think I've been in that position too, where it's like, and even still, like earlier this summer, I was like, man, I feel like this is just going downhill. Like, yeah. As successful as you can be, there's still points in it where you're like, this could just crumble at any time. Like, I mean, it really could. And the thing that you need to realize is you need to just know that it's, and have faith that it's not. And when you feel like that, you need to really look at your positives that are going on and not focus on the negatives. So how far into your career was it when you attended your first conference?
That was probably 8 years ago. So probably 5 years into being a photographer was really the first like conference that I was going to. I think I joined PPA, but I wasn't like near any of their conferences. And that was the first one that I was like really excited to go to, with Shutterfest. And I've been every year since. So it obviously made a difference.
I say that I started in 2008 is roughly when I would say that I started actually photographing for other people. And I didn't go to my first conference until 2019. I didn't even know there were conferences until probably 2017 or 18. Yeah. But when I first started going to the conferences, that's when I really knew that like this is what I wanted to do. And I wanted to go and be something more than just a photographer. And I wanted to create what I call, you know, digital art. And even in 2019, I started my YouTube in 2017, but I didn't take it seriously at all until 2019 when I went to this conference. And I was like, I want to make YouTube videos. I want to teach other people. I want to create bangers. Like I want just amazing photos. Like it's one of those things where it was like, this is what I really, really want to do. And I want to take it to something more. I mean, I could have stayed like a part-time photographer my whole life. But I was at that point when I went to my first conference, and I tell everybody this, and I'm glad you said it too, that like, if you've never went to a conference and there either is one near you or you're willing to travel, 100% go. Even if it's not for the classes, but the networking opportunities and just the learning and growing your community. I mean, like when I went to my first conference, it just completely changed my mind. It completely changed my entire outlook of what I wanted to do. And I can't tell you how many people that I've heard that have said the same thing, no matter what conference it is, as long as it's a reputable and successful conference where there's like an actual following of people that go to it, I guess you could say. I mean, an actual community, because you're getting in with people that otherwise you probably would never meet, never talk to. You're sitting at a bar chatting with photographers who are making literally millions of dollars, and you're just trying to grow. And these are the conversations that are super important there, because you're going to, and I tell a lot of people this too, is like the best information you're going to get is at the bar after the conference is over at the end of the day, because that's the time when people like myself, like you, like other successful photographers are going to give that information out that they didn't have planned that they're going to give out. Because we're holding a normal conversation. We're talking about our businesses. We're talking about our futures. And that's when we're giving the information that we weren't giving in our classes, that we weren't talking about off-camera flash, or we weren't talking about posing, but really talking about like how we've built our businesses and what our next steps are to be more successful. So
there's something to be said about just being in an environment where like being in a room where there's 500, 1,000, 2,000 people who are just like you trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do. And just knowing that you're not, you know, the only person trying to make it as a photographer, or even thinking that like everyone else out there is successful except you. Cause that's kind of where I was before I went to Shutterfest, was just like every other photographer is killing it and I'm not, and I don't know why. I'm horrible. I don't know how to run a business, all this stuff. But just to be in that group and like, see those photographers who are making $1 million a year, but then see the 100 other photographers who are just trying to buy their next camera.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's people who own studios, people who don't own studios and are working out of their house and, you know, just bouncing ideas off each other, sharing things, or seeing a style of photography that you've never seen before and be like, that's really cool. I never even thought about shooting that sort of stuff, shooting underwater or shooting pets or shooting babies or, you know, whatever else, or just super conceptual stuff that you're like, oh wait, how are you making money doing that? Where are your clients coming from?
That's one of those things.
Talk and shop.
That's one of those things that it happened to me a couple years ago at a conference, and this is a 2-part situation. But the first part is I was shooting in after hours with a bunch of photographers, and we were using like LED wands and doing like long exposure stuff. And one of the people like walked away, and I was like, you know, you're not shooting anymore. They're like, well, I'd never use this in my portfolio. And I'm like thinking to myself, it was kind of like a kick in the nuts a little bit, because I was like, that's fine if you're not going to use this in your portfolio, but get out and have fun and experience what other people enjoy to do, because you never know. Like, let's say long exposure you didn't think was your thing with like light wands and models and stuff, but you do it and you're like, this is amazing. This is what I want my business to be. Like that, just walking away from it and not experiencing and having fun and learning like something new and exciting and out of your wheelhouse is like probably one of the coolest things about conferences.
And there's a difference between, oh, I'll never use this in my portfolio, and not knowing how to use it in your portfolio or where it's going to go in your portfolio.
Right.
Because there's you could go to a class where you're learning, bodyscapes or something, and you're like, oh, I don't do nude photography, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, but you do maternity, right? Like, there's definitely, mothers who want to do maternity, but want to have that bodyscape type thing,
Yep.
or a dancer or something like that, that I've done bodyscape stuff with. It doesn't have to be nude. You have to season to taste and figure out like, okay, I see what you're making, but I want to put an Italian flair on it. I want to put,
Mhm.
whatever kind of seasoning you want to put on it and make a completely new dish out of it. But there's still something to be said about learning a technique that, even if you're like, I don't know where I'd use it now, but it might be something that you want to have in the back of your mind.
And another thing that I do, or I did, I should say, in the first year or two of going to conferences before I started speaking at them, when I was back home, I would almost always mention that I either got back from a conference or I'm going to a conference or something like that. Because me, like, I always felt that to an outsider, knowing that I'm investing in myself to learn more is more comforting
Yeah.
to the client, or the potential client, I should say. So like when I would have meetings with weddings, or when I would talk about senior photography with parents or something, I was always mentioning like, oh, I just got back from a conference, or I'm on my way to a conference soon, and where I'm going to learn blah blah blah. And like just seeing their eyes, like, okay, like he's investing in his education. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, you can watch YouTube videos until you're blue in the face and learn everything on there, but unless you're actually experiencing it, you're not really getting the full feel of it. As well as you can kind of use that as like building clout, like in your local area. Like, oh, Josh went to St. Louis to Shutterfest to learn. He went to this conference where he just learned photography for like a week. Like that sounds really good in the eyes of a potential client.
Yeah.
So think about that as you're listening to this too. That not only are you learning, but you're gaining like a piece of like something that you can say that not the other photographers in your area did.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be it for this episode. I mean, I think we're leaving off. We've told who we are and kind of what we do, and we just instantly turn this into a everybody come to Shutterfest and see both of us speak this next year.
So with you being in Wisconsin and me being in Indiana, maybe we should tell them how we even got to know each other,
Yeah, let's touch on that before we get out of here.
since that's coming up. Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. October 2nd. Wink, wink. So we both have a mutual mentor slash person we look up to, Sal Sankata, and what he does is not only does he have a super successful YouTube channel, but he runs this basically, what the way that I've been explaining it is, if you watch MasterChef, but it's for photographers.
That's exactly it. That's literally the words I've been using to explain it to people. I'm like, it's MasterChef, but for photographers.
Right. We have different competitions on each episode and all of that. And we did both sign an NDA, so we can't go too deep into this. But we both, what would you say, submitted an application. Then we had to do a video, and then we were both approved as contestants, or accepted as contestants on this. 10 photographers from all around the United States. It was super fun. We were in a big, giant, beautiful Victorian house together, like real world. So it was a lot of fun. And that's how me and Chris got to know each other.
Yeah. So Creator Series will premiere on YouTube, on Sal Sankata's YouTube channel, October 2nd. That's going to be the first episode. It's 7 episodes long. 10 photographers, including the two of us, battling it out for $25,000 in cash and prizes and stuff. But every episode is a challenge that we had no idea what that challenge was until we got there. So just like we were talking about, like stuff that, you're like, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. I'd never do this technique. I'm not going to use it. Some of those techniques came up in those challenges that I'm glad that I'd done 5, 6 years, 7 years ago, or stuff that I'd learned in college that I have never used in my business, but it's like, hey, it's back in my brain somewhere and it's going to come out in these challenges. So, You never know when you're going to be put in a situation where you're going to need to know some photography technique that you didn't need to know before. But that's coming up October 2nd, so don't miss it.
Yeah, episode 1, October 2nd. And we've already discussed that we're going to have some of the other contestants on this podcast, talking about their business, talking about how they got involved in Creator Series, and kind of talking about the episodes after they've all came out and everything. So look forward to that. I think that's who we're going to reach out first to get some of those special guests on here. And then if you, like we said at the beginning, if you have a guest you want us to have on, or if you yourself are a professional or a novice or anything in between and want to be on the podcast and be interviewed and want to talk about whatever you do, let us know. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. I think this episode is really good. I think it's informative. I hope it is. If you learned something, let us know. Drop us a message wherever you want to, on wherever you're watching this from.
Yeah, it sounds good. Super fun. Can't wait to do more of these. I think it's going to be great.
We have a list of video and audio ideas. So make sure, once again, as we always have to say when we wrap these up, hit the subscribe, the follow, whatever podcast or viewing platform you're watching us on. Leave us a comment. Tell your friends about us. Even if they're not into photography, tell them anyway, because we're cool people. So we're going to get out of here. We'll talk to you later.
Peace.